In fact, certain things people proved using computers alone. Uh, in the spirit of one of those impossibility theorems, any of you guys heard a guy named Kurt Gödel? He's one of the giants of mathematical logic. Okay, he proved the following: back in early 1900s, math was great. New theorems proved every single day. New fields opened, like topology, differential geometry on curved spaces, which Einstein needed to prove his own stuff. And people think we could basically use math to prove its own consistency. And Gödel came up with a theorem that says no mathematical system that is more complicated than counting numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, can ever prove its own consistency, which means you always need help from outside. You can prove the consistency of calculus by using differential calculus or differential equations or something else. You can use the consistency of real number algebra by using something else. You always have to expand it because these things are based on axioms. These are things that are taken to be true. For example, most math you know of and you will know are based on Euclid's 5 axioms. And basically, one follows two, something like that. But one of the complicated ones is, or controversial ones, two uh, parallel lines never intersect. That happens only in Euclidean spaces. Try doing that on a curved space like Earth sphere. They do, okay? Because the concept of straight is different in curved spaces. But I cannot prove consistency of Euclidean geometry without getting help from other places. Then I need to do something with uh, geometry in curved spaces, which was something was done by Riemann back in 1840s. He also died very young of tuberculosis when he was 40 years old. I mean, he was a guy like Carl Friedrich Gauss told him that he was the genius of the millennium. That guy died too early. Unfortunately, a lot of geniuses die early. There was a Iranian mathematician who won until then the only Fields Medal by a woman. In mathematics, Fields Medal is kind of the equivalent of Nobel Prize, but for math, and they give it out only every 3, 4 years. It's not even every year. Now there's a second woman who got it. She died of breast cancer at age 40. So math, based on that, doing complicated math is dangerous to your health. Galois died for love, so at least that's different. So I knew his story, so I named my cat after him because he was somewhat crazy. He still is. I mean, he's more like a dog than a cat. Yeah, he loves belly rubs. Cats hate that stuff, but this one does. All right. So when it comes to arguments, you telling me something is correct, that doesn't mean anything to me. You can make a complicated argument. According to Newtonian theory, the orbit of Mercury is not predicted well. Okay, that's a correct information. That doesn't mean crap to me. Why is it not correct? That's important. For example, Einstein answered that question. Or I'm sorry, Einstein answered that question. According to Einstein, gravity is the result of curvature of space-time. The sun is so bulky, it creates a dent in space-time. Mercury is being so close, it's affected by that. You don't see those kinds of effects when you're calculating the orbit of Jupiter because it's not that close to the sun. Using Newton's law of motion, you can calculate exactly where Jupiter is going to be to maybe an inch 225 years from now. You can't do that with Mercury. There's going to be a lot of errors. In fact, people were worried about that. That was the First verification of Einstein's theory. According to the equation, Mercury behaved exactly as it should. Then he showed people that light actually should bend as well. I'll talk about that some other time. That was a phenomenal experiment. And Einstein didn't become Einstein because he knew how to do all that math. In fact, when he came up with the entire construct of general relativity by 1908, he just didn't know the math that he needed to prove all of that. It took him 7 years to learn all that math. He had a nice little teacher called Hermann Minkowski. He said, "Oh, there is this differential geometry in curved spaces that you should look at from Riemann." He learns all of that. It's called tensor calculus. He learns, and then he can do it. Now they're taught in upper level physics classes, but those times that stuff was new. But Einstein didn't become Einstein because he could do all that math. He became Einstein because he thought about it. He actually came up with the theory while being a patent clerk. He was taking time off at the mountains and he thought about stuff, how things behave. Sure, he's a genius, don't get me wrong. You're not going to be Einstein's, but it's still a model to think about. Okay? If you think about how and why, you can go to a lot of places. If you think about only what, you'll be a soulless little robot. If that's all what you want to be, there is nothing wrong with that. Using my favorite Seinfeld line, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I suppose you don't want to be a soulless little robot who makes only $50,000 a year. That means more than likely you won't have a girlfriend, or if you do, you can't afford kids, or if you have kids, they're not going to college, at least not on your own money. Okay? Or if you're into recreational stuff, you can't afford that either. As I said, I'm not judging my clients. If you want to be somebody that you want to be, you need to start thinking about whys and hows. Because you can get away with only what in college. I mean, I've seen a lot of 4.0 students that I wouldn't hire them. In fact, I did not hire them. I was kind of biased against them anyway. But I always interview them. You don't turn over a 4.0 student without an interview. But they come to interview and you realize the only thing they know is how to get that an A. That was a useful skill in college, but after that, that doesn't do me anything. How am I going to have this guy talk to my clients? He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know how to think. So that's why it's more important for me how you think. And through that live polling, I'm going to actually rate your friends, have you rate your friends. Um, I'm going to, especially in this class, I'm going to use the entire grade based on your friends. I'm going to use my evaluation only as a check. If you gave a student 7 when they deserve a 2, you're paying those 5 out of your own pockets. I have a way of doing that. Since I can get all of that into Excel, as soon as you enter it, all I have to do is push a button, pulls it, and records it in the grades. No problem. And I'll show you guys how to do it. And the last 40%, 25%, as you can see, I put 40%. In my intro classes, that number is more like 20, because if you tell them to think, they want to beat you up. They don't want to. If they're finance majors, that's not a problem because they don't want to. I'll give you an example why these guys don't want to think. Just out of my own curious whim, I did an experiment last semester. Colton was in that class, so he would know. In the second midterm and the final exam, I gave him a choice of 3 types of exams. One of them is, I call it the Yo Mama. It's your mother's traditional exam. I give you 32 multiple choice questions. You give me 32 answers. Done. You got nothing to think about. No, nothing. The second one was almost Yo Mama, but on about half the questions, I give you a little menu. You get to choose the topic of the questions. Other than that, it's just standard multiple choice. The third one is the crap that I invented. I call it dial-in exam. I actually ask you before you see anything. I tell you, here's the topic. It's Asian options. Do you want a basic one, intermediate one, or a challenge one? If you do a basic one, the most you can get is 85. But if you do a challenge, you can get 115, 120 out of 100. And I even give you a chance to change your mind after that if you bit too much, but there's a little price. I would understand if a student did not want to pick that. Fine. I mean, it's to me, it's kind of more convenient because it allows you to pick easy questions when you don't feel confident. For the questions that you feel really confident for the topics, you can pick a hard one. But this is even more important when you even get to pick the topic yourself. But there's no domination as we call it. But in the presence of number two, no rational person should ever choose number one because I simply give you more options. Okay. I mean, it's like you're going to buy a beer. Either you're going to buy the beer I'm going to tell you to buy, or I'll give you a menu. You're going to pick your own beer out of that. And it's the same price. You should always go with the choice, right? Guess what? Half of my students, and they did this consistently in the second midterm and the final exam. I haven't told them what the story was. There were one or two students that changed their mind, but that was it. Half of my students picked that. Now, according to economic theory, that shouldn't happen because we're supposedly rational people. But there's probably perceived this utility of actually thinking about stuff, at least for those people. And oddly enough, not oddly, it was a result I expected because I call this a numerical literacy. Uh, that ratio was only 25% if you limited the set to finance and accounting majors. Outside those, 65%. So 2/3 of our management, marketing, and general business majors would rather get a question that I randomly pick for them instead of they pick the topic. I mean, I actually literally picked the topic randomly for them for those questions. Why? Because these people never been taught how to think. This is not complicated. But if you're not in the habit of thinking, you don't. There's a lot of stuff that we do by instinct or by some genetics that is inside us since the caveman days. Okay, why do we jump when there's a sudden noise? Okay, well, in the caveman days, that meant something important. Now it's probably a car backfire, right? You know, if you hear, uh, you know, the horse foot sounds, if you're in Savannah, heard of zebras. But if you're in London, Kentucky, don't think of zebras. Okay, it's not complicated, but if you're African, you're going to think of zebras. If you're from Kentucky, even in Africa, you're not going to think of zebras. Because it's in your genetics.